Thank you very much, and good evening, everyone. It's wonderful to see such a great turnout for what promises to be a lively, entertaining, informative, and I'm sure inspiring event. And thank you too for being willing to participate in this perfectly preposterous notion that you can choose between Beethoven and Bach. There is nothing rational about this. We happily admit that. We ask you to just suspend reason and go with emotion. Just go with it and listen to the arguments. Imagine yourselves on a desert island, perhaps, that there you are for 2 months. You're stuck with one composer. Who would you listen to? I, of course, have my own feelings, but as a BBC lifer, you'll understand that I will remain completely impartial. To help you decide between the two composers, we have two very eloquent and highly competitive speakers. Before I introduce them, though, I'm going to ask you to submit your pre-vote to get a sense of where you stand right now. So please do now vote for either Bach or Beethoven using the QR code coming up on the screen. There, you can see it. And if you're watching on live stream, please just click on the link in the chat to vote. If you're unsure, vote undecided. So Bach, Beethoven, or undecided. I'll announce those pre-vote results shortly. While you're doing that, let me introduce our speakers. Probably don't need any introduction, but I'll do it anyway. Stephen Isserlis, world-renowned cellist, author, and broadcaster. He has a multifaceted career as a soloist, a chamber musician, and educator. He appears regularly with the world's leading orchestras and works with many living composers, and his latest book is The Bach Cello Suites, a Companion. On my left is Norman Lebrecht, historian, cultural commentator, broadcaster, and award-winning novelist who has written 12 books about music. His blog, Slipdisc, is the world's most popular cultural news site, drawing 2 million readers every month. And his new book is Why Beethoven, a Phenomenon in 100 Pieces. Norman will be making the case for Ludwig van Beethoven. Stephen will be making the case for J.S. Bach. But of course, we need more than just the arguments to get a sense of the real powers of these two musical giants. We actually need to hear the music itself, of course, so it's a huge pleasure to also welcome Mishka Rushdie-Momen. She is an acclaimed concert pianist who appears in recitals and concerto performances worldwide. Her musical partners have included one Stephen Isserlis, with whom she recorded 4 recitals at the Wigmore Hall during the COVID-19 lockdown. She's also played with Joshua Bell, Anthony Marwood, Midori, and members of the Endellion, Balsier, Orion, and Artemis string quartets. And Mishka will be accompanying Stephen when he advocates for Bach and also playing Beethoven for Norman. So, just before we hear the results of that first vote, can I ask you both, Stephen, what was the moment at which you thought, it's Bach?
I don't know. It's always been Bach, really, but hang on, I have to say, I'm slightly uncomfortable being in the position of being supposed to be versus Beethoven. I worship Beethoven, I adore Beethoven, but I also worship Bach and I adore Bach, and I'm not going against Beethoven, I'm just seizing an opportunity to extol the genius of Bach. And I suppose if I had to sort of sum them up in sound bites. For me, Bach is God and Beethoven is the finest, noblest human spirit ever. So which doesn't answer your question, does it? I don't know, maybe when I played the first piece, but actually no, when I was a little boy, I used to go to sleep to the sound of my father practicing Bach's Chaconne downstairs, so maybe it was then.
Okay. Norman.
I don't know when it begins with Beethoven. Again, probably all of my life. I mean, I'm not here to bury Bach. I'm here to reappraise him in light of Beethoven, without whom music would not have gone forward. Beethoven was probably most important to me with the descent of COVID. with our isolation and with a sense, I'd started writing the book about 3 months beforehand, with a sense of empathy that I got in my own isolation with Beethoven's state of not being able to communicate through deafness. And one felt there was no other composer I wanted to live with, no other composer who could speak so intently to that moment. So yes, I mean, Beethoven, it has to be Beethoven.
What is it that Beethoven does to you? Because music is so emotional.
There is the emotion, there is the intellect, there is the ambition, there is the sense of forward propulsion. He never looks back.
Right. Stephen, with Bach?
I think Bach has everything. I mean, he's, as I said, he's like a god. He's perfect. He's sublime. But he's also so human. He understands every human emotion. And for me, also lockdown, I spent some time listening to the late Beethoven quartets, which was revelatory, but I also heard, and I'm ashamed to say it was for the first time, but I'd sort of been keeping it as a treat, Bach's Mass in B minor. Oh my God, it's so overwhelming. I mean, yes, there's never a rough edge in a way, although there can be anger and violence, but it's all within a sublime perfection. But it's so touching. He understands every human emotion, like Shakespeare does, I suppose. And he can express it, and it was so comforting to listen to his music during lockdown and many, many other times. He's a God who really cares about us.
So interesting. You both mentioned lockdown and how important these composers were to you. We'll hear more about what you have to say in just a moment. I just want to announce the first vote results. You are a very split audience. We have 45% for Bach, 42% for Beethoven, and 13% undecided. So as all politicos know, it's the 13% that you have to play for. All right, gentlemen. Stephen, can I ask you to please make the case for J.S. Bach?
Okay, but I'm going to do it. I'm like Linus in his security blanket. I'm not happy unless I have a cello in my hand. And I thought, since I do have a cello in my hand, Bach can speak for himself much better than I can speak for him. So I thought I'd start by playing the prelude of the first suite for cello. Well, that piece was, I mean, there were some solo cello pieces written before that in Italy, but Bach could not possibly have known them. As for all intensive purposes, Bach was creating a genre there. And he just understands the cello perfectly. And that goes for every instrument, and of course the voice, the organ, his instrument, the violin, his instrument, the viola, his instrument, the clavichord, his instrument, etc. He just understands everything, but you know, understanding an instrument is one thing, but the spirit, I think the radiance that comes through his music, that prelude, you know, it starts off the six suites. It starts off basically the history of solo cello music, but it's also, I find it so comforting. Somehow it's just so warm, and it's just such love shining through it, I suppose. And, you know, but it's also got the perfection that we associate with Bach, and it's perfection that makes him so important in music history that every major composer, basically, had to pay homage to Bach. He influenced them because he brought music to a higher pitch. Not literally a higher pitch, a higher pitch of perfection, I mean. And, you know, but I suppose the danger is that people sort of look at his picture with a wig and looking quite stern, and they think, oh yes, he's mathematically brilliant, you know, but he's not one of us. But he absolutely is. And the man had many children, and you can hear it in his music. You can hear the joy. I mean, there's so much joy in his music and so much humor. Maybe not laugh out loud humor necessarily, but humor that just makes you feel good, makes you feel he's having a good time, or maybe he's God watching his children having a good time. There is that sort of joy and warmth in his music, and that's why I've chosen just one movement from his first gamba sonata. Of course, it would have been gamba and harpsichord, but viola da gamba and harpsichord, but today it's cello and piano, and it's the last one. You know, it's one of reams of such pieces, but every one you get to know, you fall in love with, because there's so much information there in every note. And it's just as his first biographer said, he could make a fugue seem as simple as a minuet, and that's why Beethoven called him the immortal Jove of harmony. Quite right. Anyway, so we're playing. Oh, I've got to keep an eye on the time. When did I start?
You're fine.
Yeah, I know, but when did I start? I haven't finished yet.
Oh, I know. You started at about 20 past. No, not 7:15.
70.
You started at 7:15.
Okay, so I only have 12 minutes or so.
Yeah.
So no. Yes. Okay, it's going to be 13 minutes. Okay, last movement of the first gamba sonata. So that's Bach in a good mood, which he very often is. And don't think he was some distant academic. He got into a sword fight with a bassoonist because he told the bassoonist he sounded like a nanny goat. And he got put in prison for other things. And he also got into trouble for making music with a young lady in the organ loft. He was a lad, Bach. He was full of fire and temperament. And apparently when he conducted, they said it was like he had rhythm in every part of his body. But of course, there was another side. Besides the joy, besides the fire and the excitement, there's also this incredible profundity. And I thought I would play you without repeats, probably. No, I think I might have time for the repeats. The Saraband from the Fifth Suite. Now, this is, for me, the whole suite is the passion story for cello. And for me, this is the moment of the crucifixion where Christ is abandoned on the cross. But it doesn't matter whether you think that or not. It's such a portrait of loneliness. I mean, it's not really like, but maybe one of the high points of music for me is Ebamadic in the St. Matthew Passion, where Simon Peter realizes that the cock has crowed 3 times and he has denied Christ. And the aria that follows just sums up everything that we feel in moments when we feel remorse, when we feel grief. It's everything. And this too, this Saraband for me sums up loneliness and anguish, but it's not depressing. It's never depressing because there's again a radiance to it that it sublimates suffering through beauty. If you think about that piece, it also gives you into a glimpse of why Bach was such an influence. Because to say why it is so moving is impossible. There's no tune, there's no rhythmic interest, there are no chords. It is just, it's a miracle, I think, that piece. It's just the depth of emotion he can convey through just a few notes. And that is a huge influence even today on music. 33, right. So I better finish. And I'm sorry, I slightly sort of weighted on the slow pieces of Bach. And of course, as I said, like pieces like the Brandenburg concertos are just thrilling and exciting and full of verve and life. And of course, the Beatles used Brandenburgs, quoted the Brandenburgs, for instance, because of just that rhythmic energy. That, you know, it's funny to think that Bach influenced the Beatles, but he definitely did. But we'd like to finish with a chorale prelude. And again, Bach, in a few notes, he tells us he understands us. He makes our life better by talking to us in the voice of God.
Yes, of course. Stephen is saying he's just going to put his cello away. He will be back. Thanks to him for some very persuasive arguments and some absolutely stunning playing. With Mishka as well, I don't know about you, I sort of feel a bit breathless listening to that. Norman has a hard act to follow, but the stage is yours.
Thank you. My learned adversary has dealt with what I suppose one would call the performative aspect of the matter in hand. He's not here to hear me. I shall try and deal with the informative. He had, of course, the advantage of 4 strings. I was going to bring my viola, which was Beethoven's instrument, but
I'm back, and I heard.
Yeah. But Beethoven never wrote anything for viola. And if I had the time, which I don't, I would tell you why, because it'll take 50 minutes of psychoanalysis to explain why, in very modern terms, Beethoven turned against the viola. He was quite fond of the cello. And he was quite fond of the cello, Beethoven, and indeed of cellists. One of his best friends was a man called Count Zmeskal, who was a senior civil servant, who stole very high-quality government paper for Beethoven to write on, and he also tried to get Beethoven to accompany him on brothel crawls. Unsuccessfully, but these cellists know how to live.
I must just quickly say that I've given a recital on Beethoven's own cello in the Beethoven House in Bonn with the great musician Sir Andras Schiff. And it was an honor. But sorry, go on.
Allegedly his own cello. Unless it was stolen from Her Majesty's Stationery Office. At the risk of lowering the tone, I'd just like to deal with the philosophical matter for a second. There is a debate between Walter Benjamin and Gershom Scholem as to which is more important. Is it more important to be original, for an artist to be original or transmissible? Is it more important to create something that is unprecedented or something that can be passed on? And here we have the schism, the great division between Bach and Beethoven. Bach is a monumental figure in music. He is the repository of all the music that has come before him, translated into a way that can be handed forward. There is hardly any composer who is more quoted by his successors, from Haydn to Shostakovich, than Johann Sebastian Bach. There is hardly any composer who is quoted less by his successors than Ludwig van Beethoven. Beethoven's originality was daunting. Everything he did was new. He didn't, Bach, like all composers of his period, quoted from himself, quoted from others, lifted whole concertos of Vivaldi and put them out under his own name with a different solo instrument. It was, come on, it was the 18th century, it's what you did. Beethoven is in the 19th century. Beethoven is looking consistently forward in everything that he does. Everything from the very first moment that he sets foot in Vienna is totally and completely new. He comes to Vienna a few months after Mozart died, and everybody says, oh, he's a talented boy, he could be the next Mozart. Beethoven says, no. Do not mistake me for anyone else. I'd like to ask Mishka just to play us a little bit of the Opus 10 number 2. It's the 5th piano sonata. It's written for a Mrs. Brown. You heard it. Yeah, he was one of Mrs. Brown's boys. It's written for a Mrs. Brown who was the wife of the head of intelligence at the Russian embassy. So she's also Mrs. Putin. And it is one of the ways in which Beethoven says to the world, I am Beethoven, there is no other. Mishka. you.